This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
I'd like to introduce Claudio Celis Bueno, who is a critical and cultural theorist. He taught at the University of Diego in Chile, and he's just obtained his PhD. Congratulations, at the University of Cardiff. And his PhD focused on the role played by the attention economy and post-Utopian, with the standpoint of labour and time as mechanisms of social control. As a filmmaker, he brought out the documentary Para in 2009.
Thank you. Well, thank you, first of all, to the organizers for inviting me here. And as Katja said, I think this is going to be a good dialogue between the previous paper and this book. And well, I just finished my PhD, so this is something completely new that I'm researching on. So it's a work in progress, so obviously all feedback and comments are going to be very useful. So I tried to displace some of the theoretical concepts that I used in my PhD to the specific object of the city. So I'm not an expert in urban studies, but I try to look at specific things of urbanism from this sort of post-Marxian framework. I'll start with a quote from Marc Aurèle from his book Non-Places, which is the non-place is the opposite of utopia. It exists, yet it does not contain any organic society. So hopefully throughout the discussion, through this paper, we can sort of understand more or less what Aurèle is trying to say. In general, my preoccupations are that I want to look at the concept of utopia, focusing on the passage from Fordism to post-Fordism, or to say otherwise, I would have to see how the passage to post-Fordism or to an post-industrial society affects what we understand and we can imagine by utopia. And to look at that, and also to contextualize it in the specific case of the conference of Memories of the Future, I would like to use as a case study the work of American intellectual Louis Mumford. And I think that's where also a lot of the connections with Bellamy and Morris will come out from. So I'd like to, and I'll focus specifically on a film by Mumford. It's called The City. It's from 1939. It's a film commissioned by the American Institute of Planners and based on a script by Mumford. So I'd like to suggest two main hypotheses. And the first one is that in Mumford's definition of a utopian city or an ideal city, it's mainly based on a rational organization of the use value of labor. And that's something we can discuss. And the second hypothesis is that precisely the possibility to identify a use value of labor is what disappears with the passage towards post-Fordism. So that's when we need to imagine a new definition of utopia or post-utopian thinking. Precisely because of that impossibility of identifying something such as the use value of labor. So I'll divide the presentation in two parts. First, we'll focus on Louis Mumford, and then we can move to the more critical perspective where we use Antonio Negri and Michael Hart's considerations on historical method to sort of revisit Mumford's work. So let's begin with Mumford. So the concepts of utopia and the concept of the city are two of the probably the two most important concepts in Lewis Mumford. And unlike the argument from the previous presentation, for Mumford, there is an internal relation between these two concepts. So his first book is The Story of Utopias from 1922, where he sort of tells the history of this concept from the Greeks, from Plato, until Bellamy, precisely. And in this book, he argues that the city is the territory through which most of these authors have imagined a utopia. So he argues that utopias are always imagined in the context of the city, from Plato again to Bellamy. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that Lewis Mumford introduces at the end of this book is the notion of utopia. So rather than utopia as being the non-place, and we'll come back to this, utopia is the good place. So the non-place, in its original Greek definition, is the place that is not here, that will hopefully be here at one point. So it's always open to the future. Rather, the utopia is the good place that it is possible now. It's just not possible because we haven't organized society properly. So we'll come back to this distinction. And then in 1938, so during the 30s, Lewis Mumford started doing concrete studies on the history of cities. So he published this 1938 book, The Culture of Cities, which is part of his major project called the Revival of Life series, where one of his most famous books, which is Techniques and Civilization, is part of. So Techniques and Civilization is from 1934. It's the first volume to the Revival of Life series, and The Culture of Cities is the second volume. And then in 1961, he published The City History, which is again one of his most famous works. Just one small observation. For Lewis Mumford, a city is not just a physical fact or a territory. It's basically, and before all, it's a social institution that in different periods it fulfills different, let's say, social functions. So that's what he's actually creating a story of, not the city as a physical fact, but the city as a social institution. That's something very important also in his definition of utopia, his idea of planning. So as I said before, today I want to focus on a less known work, which is this film from 1939, this documentary film, propaganda film, if you want, called The City. So this is from 1939. It was commissioned by the American Institute of Planners and based on a script by Lewis Mumford. It's also narrated by Mumford himself. So one of the things that why I think is important, why this film is significant, is because of its date. I mean, produced in 1939, it's sort of it's a record also of what was going on at that time in political terms of, let's say, post-1929 crisis. It's part of the New Deal in the US, with all these Keynesian economic policies that are calling for, let's say, a more rational and active role of the state in terms of economic planning. So there is, and this is something I won't have time to go into, but we can discuss later, but I think there are interesting connections between Mumford's idea of planning and the Keynesian idea of planning, specifically in the New Deal, Brussels New Deal. Actually, some of the examples he uses in this film are two cities that were built as part of the New Deal. So we can discuss that later. So the film begins with this quote. It says, year by year our cities grow more complex and less fit for living. The age of rebuilding is here. We must remold our old cities and build new communities better suited to our needs. So already here, there are a few things that I want to point out. So first, as I said before, the city for Mumford is a social institution. So what we need to organize is not just the city in physical terms, but the city as a place where social interaction takes place. Secondly, he says the age of rebuilding is here. So utopia is no longer something of the future, but it's something that is possible now, thanks to technology. Obviously there's also a critique of present cities and how they've grown because of technological development, unplanned technological development, etc., and industrialism. The film is divided in 4 parts. So there's the first part that shows a pre-modern city in New England where there's harmony between man and nature and between the individual and the community. And this is a very idealized vision of the past. Then the second part shows some slums in an industrial city where there's poverty and social inequality, so as part of the consequences of industrialism and unplanned and unregulated cities. And then it shows a third part where there's like mechanized and impoverished life in modern metropolis. So this is not so much about poverty and social inequality, but it's more about how the users of the modern city are alienated because of technology. And the fourth and final part is this ideal city, the ideal city that he imagines. So this is the more prescriptive part, where he argues that thanks to technology we can reach ideal green cities where there's harmony again between needs, social needs and labor, basically. So what I want to do now is to show some fragments from the film. I mean, the film is half an hour long, so we don't have time to watch it all. It's available online, so you can find it there. It's worth watching if you're interested with Mumford. But I want to show some fragments and to focus specifically on this, the relation between labor and technology in these 4 sections of the film. So we can afterwards sort of discuss this from a more critical perspective or post-industrial perspective. So as I said, I pay special attention to this relation between labor and technology. So this is the first section, where there's this sort of pre-modern, idealized community.
A century or 2 ago, we built our church and marked the common out. We raised the town hall next, so we could have our say about the taxes, or whether we need another teacher for the school. When town meeting comes around, we know our rights and duties, and no harm if we disagree. In all that matters, we neighbors hold together. We work from sun to dark, if you can call just work a job that helps make a body feel at peace while doing it, or hum a bit with pleasure when it's done. Art isn't something foreign we look at in a showcase. It's in the blankets that we've spun and woven right at home. It's in the patchwork quilt sewn by our daughters at a quilting bee for someone's bridal chest. It's in the locks and hinges that the blacksmith shapes. It's in the baskets that are woven in the neighborhood to fit our household needs, from marketing to mending. When water wheels are better fitted to do the work than human hands, we rig up the machines to saw the wood or grind the corn for hominy grits and johnny cake. A while ago, that corn was on the stalk, above the pumpkins, ripe and young. One night, the neighbors met to shell the ears together. They did the job in no time, so they could clear the old barn floor and choose their favorite partners for the dances. There was lasting harmony between the soil and what we built or planted there. We used our hands and mastered what we laid our hands on. Working and letting, we found a balance. The town was us, and we were part of it. We never let our cities grow too big for us to manage. We never pushed the open land too far away. The youngsters took it in. The haying field, the mill, the daily chores were teachers.
Okay. Is the volume all right? Okay. So this is the first section. Now I'll show the passage from the first section to the second section. So the passage from this idealized version or vision of labor to industrial to an industrial system. Second section. Now for the third section. The third section is quite interesting because it's there's basically no commentary on it, and formally it's the most interesting one because it seems to borrow a lot from the experimental filmmakers from the 20s. So from Sigabertov, the man with the movie camera, and German Berlin Symphony, Symphony of the City. So there's no commentary on the third section. This is the critique of alienation and modern life. So I'd like to show this final. Yes, from here. It's this final bit from the third section.
Perfectly down. With some wine. You have a ride, Russia. Oh, yeah? You have a ride, Russia. Walk with me. We're beating down. Why not? Very well.
Then the third section continues like this, and then there's a critique of traffic and etc. As I said, this is a quite interesting section in terms of like formal, from a formal perspective, and interestingly, when the fourth section begins, which I'll show now. Here. The first phrase in the, as you will see, it says silence takes flight at last for human goals. So, I mean, in a way, this silence, referring to the silence in the third commentary, is also sort of symbolizing maybe silence in terms of planning, of a rational planning of cities, or maybe a lack of communication because of technology. So it's quite interesting that the film is also playing with this. And then the commentary comes back on and starts describing this ideal city. So this is the fourth section.
Science takes flight at last for human goals. This new age builds a better kind of city, close to the soil or more, as molded to our human wants as planes are shaped for speed. New cities take form, green cities. They're built into the countryside. They're ringed with trees and fields and gardens. New cities are not allowed to grow and overcrowd beyond the size that makes them fit for living in. The new city is organized to make cooperation possible between machines and men and nature. Each has its place. The sun and air and open green are part of the design. Safe streets and quiet neighborhoods are not just matters of good luck. They're built into the pattern and built to stay there. Power flashes from pitheads are rapid streams across the region. It flows from powerhouses to the sunlit factories and laboratories. Here science serves the worker and the work together, making machines more automatic and the men who govern them more human. Factories are set apart from living quarters, but close to rail and motor roads, with space to spread about in. Light industries are near at hand. The heavy ones are set apart. People can even walk to work and have their lunch at home sometimes, just like the kids. This is no suburb where the lucky people play at living in the country. This kind of city spells cooperation, wherever doing things together means cheapness or efficiency or better living. Each house is grouped with other houses close to the school, the public meeting hall, the movies, and the markets. Around these green communities, a belt of public land preserves their shape forever. The children need the earth for playing and growing, bringing the city into the country. bringing the parks and gardens back into the city, never letting cities grow too big to manage, never pushing the meadows, fields, and woods too far away. This works as well for modern living as once it did in old New England towns.
And then, again, it continues showing examples from these ideal cities, which were actually being built in 1939. Well, yeah, we're running out of time, so I'll just sort of try to wrap it up quite quickly. First I wanted to identify that in each one of these sections in the film, there are three different relationships between labor and technology. So in the first one, there's this idea of craft labor in this idealized version of a pre-modern town. So labor is not seen as work, but it's seen as a fulfilling activity. And then cooperation is seen as a way of achieving efficiency, which is then used to create more free time. And then there's that example of through cooperation, then we have more free time, we can choose our partners for the dance. So that's what's significant. And then labor is sort of this thing we need to satisfy basic needs, but through cooperation we can sort of have more free time. Contrary to this, then there's the sort of mechanization and alienation of industrial cities, where on the one hand there's poverty and unemployment and insecurity, and on the other hand there's people just sort of living like machines, with a section of eating. And then, but what is interesting in Manford is that there's neither like a blind critique of technology nor a blind faith in technology, but he, as an organicist, he believed that it was possible to achieve sort of organic balance between these three things, between labor, nature, and technology. So as a sort of conclusion to part one, we can say that Manford's ideal city is based on a rational organization of the use value of labor. So it is useful to produce the use value of things to satisfy needs, but this organization is based on an organic understanding of society which doesn't see technology as a solution, neither as something evil, but as something that has to be balanced. And for that, we need both technological progress, but also a better understanding of society, what society is. And that was sort of his goal as a historian. So that's the conclusion to part one, which I thought it would take much less to present. So I'll just sketch very briefly the main ideas that I wanted to present in the second section, so we can discuss them later. So basically I'm using Hart and Negri's historical method, which is neither a historicist method, as we say, just merely telling the history of capitalism, but it's like the internal history of capital, of the development of the capital-labor relationship, and that is the story of the history of this relationship, the capital-labor relationship, which is a strictly capitalist relationship that they used in order to analyze the historicity of their concepts. So, on the one hand, that means that their method is only valid for capitalist society, because they're not claiming a universal method, but a method only focusing on this relationship between capital and labor, which is strictly capitalist. And on the other hand, they don't apply, so their critique of capitalism is not like in what they would call traditional Marxism, a critique of capitalism from the perspective of labor, so that capitalism alienates labor, and labor is this sort of universal essence of man, but rather that labor is a strictly capitalist category, and that it's through that, it's through the analysis of that, of the historicity of that category, that we can understand contemporary society. So, having said that, we could read Mumford's film as from this perspective, from the perspective of the capital and labor relationship, using their method. So, Hard and Negri say that there, in this relationship between capital and labor, which is a historical relation, has three stages. So a stage of pre-industrial capitalism, what Marx would call formal subsumption of labor under capital, industrial capitalism, which is real subsumption of labor under capital, and a post-industrial capitalism, or an age of a social factory, or what they call post-Fordism. And in the first stage, the relation between labor and capital remains external. So capital takes over a form of labor that existed before capitalism, so crafts, like pre-capitalist crafts, and it takes over this labor and sort of subsumes it under the wage system. So it starts creating surplus from that form of labor, but without changing it. So in this context, surplus value can only be produced by extending labor time, because the form of labor remains the same. So if I want to produce more, I have to make the worker work more than he was working before to produce what he needed for his own needs. So the example of the dance is again a good example, because in Mumford's idealized version, the workers would, produce more efficiently in order to have free time for their own social activities, while capitalism in its first stage does exactly the same, but instead of the workers having that extra time for their dance, that's the time where they are producing the surplus value. In the second stage, then, labor is transformed by capital. So then machines start become important. And this is, I think, the passage from one to the other is something that precisely Mumford cannot grasp, because he's not looking at it from the perspective of the capital-labor struggle, which is that because capital wants to produce more surplus value, then it introduces machines. So in this idealized version of a pre-modern society, there was no need for technology, because there was a balance between needs and labor. But capitalism introduces machines precisely because it wants to generate more surplus value. So in Mumford's view, it just seems that the problem with modern cities is that this sort of is a result of technological development on its own, and not because of this deeper political struggle between capital and labor. And finally, just to finish, I'd like to say that for Negri, and this is obviously something that Mumford could not visualize in 1939, the passage to a post-industrial society means that there's this, as I said, the crisis of the use value of labor, because labor becomes, every activity becomes potentially an activity that capital can turn into valorizing activity. So therefore it's not possible anymore to identify this idea of a use value of labor. That's something, again, we can discuss, because we didn't have time to go into detail into that. So there's this sort of three stages that I wanted to identify. So there, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's this utopia, the concept of utopia, which meant there was a future to come, a better future to come. Then Mumford thought that in 1939 we had reached enough technological development to make that future a reality in the present. And then Hart and Negri, they introduced this idea of the non-place of exploitation, where they take this concept of non-place from precisely from Marc Auger, and these non-places of supermodernity, so shopping malls, airports, supermarkets, that are no longer places anymore, in the sense that there's no social interaction there that is not mediated by an economic exchange. And that's true precisely of all these places, for example, like in airports. One of the examples he gives is that there are no airports, there are no places to sit and socialize unless you are paying for what you're consuming, or shopping malls, etc. So if you want to socialize, you have to be already in an exchange, in a situation of exchange. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, I thought it would be shorter. We can discuss.